Hello, my name is Mage, and welcome to Black and White Thinking, and to a new series where I am going to discuss bisexual tropes in mainly American mainstream film and television. So what's a trope? A trope being a shorthand tool within storytelling where a writer recreates plot devices, characters, etc. that the audience can already recognise because they have seen it before in previous stories. A cycle of images that repeats throughout literature and media and all storytelling mediums. In terms of bisexual television tropes, in the manner we will be discussing today, I essentially mean a group of attributes recognisable in a range of bisexual characters, or bicoded characters, that unify them as a collective. So instead of bisexual characters existing under one recognisable set of ideals, under one trope, I believe we can further categorise the portrayal of bisexual characters in the media in order to acknowledge the many, often problematic, bisexual tropes that are used within today's on-screen stories. The tropes I will discuss in this series are all ones that I have personally recognised myself, with the help of some people in my life, of course. Whilst I personally think all of the tropes I will discuss are prevalent in the media at the moment, if you don't, that's fine too. If you think I've missed anything or want to discuss this kind of sad bisexual media analysis with me further, please come find me. My purpose here with identifying these tropes is to help people further understand how bisexual plus representation influences the views, norms and behaviours that society enacts and maintains around bisexuality, and how this affects the real life treatment of bisexual people. This isn't a new idea, of course. The idea that storytelling affects ideas is archaic, and it remains obvious to us in all forms of human interaction. It has also been proven true through research. People are influenced by what they hear, see and absorb, and this can be particularly important when trying to understand the cultural treatment of minority groups. I'm bisexual, I think there is a place for this discussion, so here we are. Bisexuality's invisibility belies its ubiquity within our culture, and indeed constitutes a disavowal of the twinned fascination and anxiety bisexuality provokes. For there are traces throughout the contemporary screen mediascape that suggest the degree to which bisexuality serves as a driving force in the production, marketing, and consumption of screen media and technology, not just in queer cinema or on cable channels targeted at the gay community, but on network shows and in Hollywood movies playing at the local multiplex. The presence of bisexuality is not limited to bisexual characters and plot lines involving bisexual relationships. Bisexuality is also a crucial component in the strategies and processes involved in selling and experiencing screen media. Yet this presence goes almost entirely unacknowledged and undiscussed. Media scholars and critics occasionally appear to notice it, but they call it by other names: gay, lesbian, homoerotic, homosocial, queer. To a surprising extent, bisexuality remains the orientation that dares not speak its name. Into this discursive gap falls a good deal of knowledge that is essential we retrieve in order to grasp with precision how sexuality works, not just within film and television, but with regard to everyday desires, behaviours and subjectivities. Maria Sanfilippo. Okay, so hello and welcome to the second video in a vague series I am doing discussing bisexual tropes on television. Today I want to talk about that which we cannot see, that which we refuse to name. I'm going to be talking about unlabelled and unnamed bisexuality. Specifically in this video, I'm going to be talking about what it looks like on modern television, specifically American television. I'm going to talk about the prominent erasure of the bisexual label in bisexual lead characters, why I think it's even a thing, and who I think it affects. Let's do this. In her book, The B Word, Maria Sanfilippo discusses bisexual invisibility on screen at length, discussing how bisexuality is often visible and perhaps even exploited in television and film, but never named and rarely seen as an orientation of its own. Bisexuals across genres are often united by one thing: the fact that their bisexuality is technically visible through action, but not through words. Filippo basically argues that when this happens, bisexual representation falls flat. or at least it trips over itself, failing to tell a complete bisexual story when bisexuality itself goes unnamed. Unnamed in a way Filippo suggests that monosexual identities aren't. Which, is all ridiculous, really. It shouldn't be that hard to say the word bisexual on television, especially in the land of the free, the home of the brave, especially in a post-Prop 8 marriage equality era. 8 years after Filippo wrote about this in her book, The B Word, more elegantly than I ever could, bisexual characters are still named few and far between. And I guess I can't help but personally notice that a lot of characters on television that are allowed to discuss their bisexuality are side characters, or members of an ensemble, whereas bisexual leads are more likely to avoid labelling themselves, which, unlike a lot of queer content that is labelled gay or lesbian, leaves bisexual media, bisexual representation, in question. How do we address that which is bisexual but does not name itself as such, or is not even recognised as such by its audience? How does this lack of identity affect a proportion of the audience it supposedly represents? Especially considering how often bisexuals find their orientation erased or called into question in their real-world interactions. Over the last 10 years or so, the presence of bisexual leads has increased, while representation for the bisexual label in these leads, and the identities and cultures that bisexuality encompasses, has arguably been less represented. A lot of our bisexual leads are, by societal standards, not that bi, and like I said, when they are bisexual in action, they often aren't named as such. Did anyone else go through a sad gay teen lost girl phase? Yeah, I am your qualified elder Winona Earp fans. For those of you who didn't catch the unholy debauchery that was Sci-Fi's Lost Girl back in the day, let me fill you in. Lost Girl is a show centering around the struggles of Bo Dennis, a bisexual succubus, i.e. a monster who needs to have sex to survive, as Bo is pulled between two magical fae tribes, one light, one dark, while also being dragged into a monosexual love triangle between a straight werewolf man and a mortal lesbian doctor. Everything about the show is bisexual, from the monosexual lovers who don't really understand you, to the metaphor of succubus as good old-fashioned bisexual slut, to the opposite fae representing these two so-called opposing sides within Bo, with her learning to exist as all and none at the same time. Bo eventually accepting her connections to both light and dark fae, as she too learns to accept the, and these words are in big quotes, straight and gay sides of her orientation. Honestly, the show was always at its best when it was just focusing on Bo's relationship with her best friend Kenzie, but whatever. Lost Girl is bisexual, and explicitly so, having so many characters who are queer, and yet it somehow never explicitly uses the word bisexual, nor does Bo ever call herself bisexual. It's the implicit, explicit bisexuality. It's confusing. Bisexuality is an act in Lost Girl is never erased. It's just the identity that is. Now, as always, my old pal, my old buddy, DC Comics, has multiple bisexual lead characters right now on television. There's obviously Harley and Ivy in the Harley Quinn animated show, but then there is also Lucifer, there was the short-lived Constantine, and there's Sarah Lance on Legends of Tomorrow. And once again, none of these lead bisexuals have ever used the phrase bisexual to talk about themselves. Harley and Ivy I have covered. Lots. Please go watch those videos. Constantine was cancelled after one season, the creator of the show just outright saying he planned to ignore his main character's bisexuality. On Lucifer, bisexuality is played for a joke and is synonymous with evil, and who knows what they were doing with Sarah's relationships or character back in her original Arrow run. When Legends started and Sarah moved, Sarah's bisexuality was much more solidified, and the writers on Legends handled it much better than the ones on Arrow who had had Sarah before. However, Sarah still never labels herself as bisexual. The word is used in reference to her by another character, and the cast and crew use the word to reference Sarah. And Sarah does say that she likes men and women, but again, she never actually self-identifies using the word bisexual. Even when Constantine shows up in the show later, and these two bisexual characters go on to have sex, and then go on to have relationships with people of the same gender afterwards, the word still isn't used by either of those characters. I'm pretty sure they also have Captain Cold be straight in one universe but like gay in another, which is irrelevant to this overall video, but lame. Then there are bisexual women of the DC cinematic universe in Diana and Harley, who don't get to interact with each other on any level, and then neither of them actually get to be bisexual on screen. Again, lots of bisexual leads, no self-identified bisexuality, no bisexual identity. And this pattern repeats itself in shows like The 100 or Game of Thrones, which use fantasy settings to justify their bisexual invisibility. Or shows like The Good Place, which play this whole will they, won't they, maybe let's just make a joke out of it, with Eleanor's blatant bisexuality, even letting K-Bell say dumb things in interviews. There is the jokey invisibility with Bob in Bob's Burgers, or the stagnant invisibility of Rob in High Fidelity, not forgetting the malicious invisibility of the Queen's Gambit. Or there's Killing Eve, where the word is used to reference a side character, but not actually our leads, I'm pretty sure. Or Phoebe Waller-Bridge's magnum opus, Fleabag, who is also bisexual, but again, doesn't actually just say it. There is literally every character on Mr. Robot. Then there are kids shows that have bisexual representation, but they tend to keep the labelling of sexualities to interview quotes from showrunners, like The Owl House or Adventure Time or The Legend of Korra. And then there are the shows with the bisexual leads that do say it, but like, eventually. Annalise from How to Get Away with Murder is a pretty solid example of this. Her character, pretty evidently, in my opinion, wasn't written as bisexual from the beginning, and when her newfound for the writers in season 2 but past for her character bisexual relationship with a woman was written into the show, Annalise wasn't labelled as bisexual. In season 2 of the series, at a bar with her ex-girlfriend, Annalise, who has had relationships with both men and women at this point, replies, "It's complicated," when asked if she is a lesbian. It isn't until far later in the show, nearer to the end of its run, that Annalise proudly self-identifies with the bisexual label, while she's on trial for murder if I remember correctly. Which, if you are versed in the wonders of gay television, may sound a little familiar to Piper Chapman over on Orange is the New Black. And it is, kind of. But I think Piper's story and how Orange is the New Black chooses to approach her storyline and bisexuality as a whole deserves a slightly closer analysis. Firstly, because Piper's sexuality, or at least how it was portrayed, was a pretty avid talking point for the entirety of the show, and it was a literal theme of the show. Piper herself is often held up as a prime example of the invisible bisexual. Also because I don't necessarily agree that Piper is Orange's biggest bisexual problem. I personally believe the show has far more iffy portrayals of bisexuality, and that Piper's journey itself, her journey to bisexual identity, whilst slow going, is akin to situations faced by real-world bisexual people in their everyday interactions. Orange is the New Black began airing in 2013, and it centres on the life of bisexual protagonist Piper Chapman, when she is sent to prison for a crime she committed 10 years previously. At the beginning of the show, Piper is dating a man, Larry, until she is sent to prison after her ex-girlfriend, Alex, turns her into the cops in exchange for a lighter sentence. Now, at the beginning of Orange is the New Black, most people see Piper as an ex-lesbian who has magically reformed and is now into dudes. Gross.
She failed to mention the lesbian lover who ran an international drug smuggling ring. Imagine my surprise.
What on earth did you do with the money?
Well, grandmother, I wasn't really in it for the money.
Oh, Piper, for heaven's sake.
Obviously, when Piper is sent to a woman's prison with her ex-girlfriend, her queerness is less easily sidelined by not only the people in her life, but herself too.
That she'd turn gay again.
Whoa, that's not happening. And you don't just turn gay. You fall somewhere on a spectrum, like on a Kinsey scale. What are you afraid of? That I'm going to do something? Gay?
Through the first season, we see characters all around Piper discussing what her sexuality looks like, including flashbacks to her relationship with Alex and how she met Larry after they split up. Most of the straight people in Piper's life call her a lesbian, or a lesbian now, or a lesbian again. Queer people tend to do the same, whilst also occasionally calling her a straight girl. No one, including Piper, ever actually just uses the word bisexual to identify her, even when she is torn between a man and a woman, even when she is evidently and obviously bisexual. The word just doesn't seem to exist in universe in the early seasons of Orange is the New Black, which I will explain the irony behind that in a minute. When Piper does attempt early on in the show to explain to her family her sexuality, she doesn't seem to have access to this word and instead uses the Kinsey scale of all things to try to explain it, which again is wild. Piper's male lover calls her a lesbian. Her female lover complains about falling in love with a straight girl, even as Piper declares to them both that she likes men and women. As the show goes on, Piper's relationship with Larry ends, and her relationship with Alex rekindles. Piper is in a women's prison now, this is a women's prison show, and she even takes Ruby Rose as a prison wife at one point. Everything is essentially in full lesbian mode for a while, with Larry even leaving the show for a large chunk of it, which no one really cries about because Larry fucking sucks. Piper stays pretty unwavering in her bisexuality, no matter who she's dating and no matter how many times someone calls her a straight girl or a lesbian, even though she doesn't use the word bisexual. She does always emphatically tell people that her attraction to people is not necessarily tied to gender. She, like Sarah in Arrow, tends to say that she likes men and women when describing her orientation. Spoilers ahead for Orange is the New Black. So prison stuff happens a lot in this show, that's the plot. Alex and Piper are chaotic and made for each other, and the show ends up with them actually together. Larry, because he is awful, actually ends up with Piper's shitty best friend. Piper's bisexuality is named openly by the end of the show.
I'm so glad you're dressing up again. I was afraid you were turning into one of those butch lesbians.
Mom?
Sorry. Bisexuals. I don't even know how you do that, actually. Both genders.
And whilst I'm pretty sure there is never a scene where Alex apologises for being biphobic, by the end of the show, she and Piper have a much better understanding of each other as people, and Piper's bisexuality is not an issue, which it shouldn't be. Good. Larry is not quite as understanding. Even in later seasons, long after he and Piper have broken up, he says that Piper never really wanted to be with him. This leads to an interesting conversation where Piper affirms, sensing Larry's "maybe you were just a lesbian the whole time" dog whistle, that she did want to be with him when she was with him, but Alex is just the love of her life. She doesn't love Alex more because she is a woman, simply because Piper and Alex are in love in a way that Piper and Larry just never were. That's how love works. That's just how being bisexual works.
Because you didn't actually want to be with me. You wanted to be with Alex. You always wanted to be with Alex.
Oh, Larry, I wanted to be with you. But Alex, it's like we met and I grew another limb. And it's like she's a part of my body.
Piper Chapman, the character, is actually based off a real-life bisexual writer named Piper Kerman. And personally, I have always found her use of Orange is the New Black as an interesting way of reaffirming her own bisexuality. Kerman has always been someone who has been pretty vocal about her bisexual identity, in contrast to her character, which is important to me personally, because she identified as a lesbian for a long time because she knew she liked women and hung around in women-loving women's spaces. But she met a man and she fell in love and she married him, and she realised she had a lot of internalized biphobia and now takes up queer space as a married bisexual woman. Married bisexuals who marry someone of the opposite gender often have their sexuality completely disregarded. So Piper Kerman taking up this space is good. Bisexuals married to those of a different gender are still queer, and they should take up as much queer space as they damn like. This visibility is actually good for all bisexual people, and bisexual health as a whole. Piper Kerman having married a man, and Piper Chapman having married a woman, the character, is a nice way for Kerman in real life to affirm her bisexuality through her work. This is one of the reasons I do think Orange may have gotten unfair press, at least in regards to Piper, because Piper herself is based, how much so is not really the issue here, off of the experiences and memoirs of a literal bisexual. If Piper had just said she was bisexual in season 1, I don't think any of this controversy would have existed, because otherwise, honestly, Piper Chapman's bisexuality is probably the most stable thing about her. And I guess I've always related to Piper a little. I mean, you can watch my crazy bisexual lady trope video for more on that. Also, Taylor Schilling is a seriously underappreciated comedic actress. There is nothing as funny as this scene.
Wow, take it easy. Take it easy. Fuck that, I was branded, okay? Man, I did not see that coming.
Holy shit. You're a Nazi now?
Not a Nazi. I think I'm a Nazi sympathizer. I think that was the message. I brought this on myself. This is what I've become. This is what I've become. This is what I've fucking become, you guys. I think that I've been trying to win prison.
But I've also always related to Piper in the way that her invisibility is dealt with. And it does, in my humble opinion, feel like less of a cop-out in terms of bisexual representation as Lorna Morello's sexuality. Lorna Morello is also very bisexual, hypersexualized, worse than Piper, perhaps, and her mental health issues are far more fetishized. Piper's story, her invisibility, is about not having the language to express what you know. It's about being bisexual and just everyone telling you you are wrong. Piper's story is gaslighting about orientation at its best. My personal experience with parents, friends, gays and straights is not that different. Bisexuals are often lacking the support systems that are afforded to monosexuals because they are alienated by gay people and straight people. Alienation, which eventually leads to erasure, which renders bisexual people labelless and invisible and in the closet. I really do wish Piper had said she was bisexual in the earlier seasons, but I do think her invisible bisexuality is dealt with much better than that of Lorna's or Soso's or Dyer's, and 2 is like incredibly on the nose when it comes to telling a story of how bisexuals are rendered invisible by the world around them, not only by themselves. Orange is the New Black is really far from perfect, but Piper's journey, being actually curated at some level off of the experiences of a real-life bisexual woman, feels similar to something like Desiree Akhavan's The Bisexual. Having a bisexual writer supporting Piper's story is why Lorna and Soso and Dyer are not eventually represented in the show with quite a strong or sympathetic bisexual narrative.
When I hear bisexual, I think lame slut. It's tacky, it's gauche, it makes you seem disingenuous, like your genitals have no allegiance. It's not a cool thing to be, and it makes my fucking skin crawl.
Alright, Jesus. Don't need to be so fucking touchy about it.
I recently watched a video by YouTuber Jessie Gender, who you should definitely check out if you haven't. In this video, she discusses her transition, and in that video, she related some of her feelings around her gender dysphoria to her audience with the use of a quote made famous by Elie Wiesel, but was around, according to my research, for a lot longer than that. When I heard her reiterating this quote, I couldn't stop thinking about how I related it to my own queerness. The opposite of love is not hate, but indifference. Yeah, so bisexual invisibility has a distinctly negative effect on bisexual people. I'm not here to argue that, and I will be making a much wider video on bisexual erasure on screen at some point. This video is more of a discussion about bisexual lead characters, but the consequences remain the same. Bisexuals not being represented in media, in positions of power, in places they can be seen, like any other minority group, leads to health consequences for bisexual people. And there is something about bisexual invisibility that screams indifference to me. Indifference in how characters feel about their own identity. Indifference in how the characters around the bisexual characters treat them. Indifference at how writers feel about their bisexual characters' identity. And this indifference can feel a lot like silent violence when it leads to the suffering of real-life bisexual people who do not see themselves reflected well in any place, or do not see people outside of bisexual creators fight for their identity to be represented. It's hard to really find any bisexual lead that stands up for their identity. It is very much left to side characters. And whilst bisexual side characters are fine and great, and I want them, and some of these characters are genuinely some of the best representation on TV right now, it will never be the same as a character like Bo or Piper, or Sarah or Lucifer, standing up and saying, "I'm bisexual," whilst they lead their given show. There are shows like You, Me, Her, which brings up bisexuality pretty on, if I can remember correctly. But given that it is a show that is more about bisexual polyamory and no one watches it, it again shows that, like Orange and The Bisexual, that unless your show is about bisexuality at its core, then the word bisexual is unlikely to be ever said. And even then, it might not be. SVU recently brought in a new main detective who is bisexual and also Lebanese. Cue the Glee reference.
I'm Hispanic. Wait, was that supposed to be lesbian?
But again, we are 22 seasons into a police propaganda show, so what's the point? Who are we helping at this point? And I could go on. I could go on and on and on just naming shows like this. Like, I'm pretty sure the word bisexual is never said in Broad City, right? I mean, not in regards to Abby and Alana. Alana is bisexual, she is evidently so from like the first episode and is open about her attraction to multiple genders. Abby discovers her attraction to women later in the show, but I don't think the word has ever actually been said in regards to them. I mean, there is this scene.
I'm bisexual.
That is true masculinity. You are truly evolved, and I am truly wet.
But yeah, fuck it. I'm not going to touch Broad City here. That's a whole video of its own. My point is, if you want a bisexual character who identifies as bisexual, then you better be watching a show literally called The Bisexual, made by a bisexual woman, or you're never really going to find what you're looking for, apparently. I love that for us. There is one character who isn't exactly identified as bisexual from the beginning, but like I said, no bisexual characters really are. But this character's journey is one I find fascinating and definitely interesting enough to mention, and I don't know, maybe one of the best bisexual representations on television ever, in a show that I don't even watch. This character has a sexuality that's a little bit more like Piper's. When the show starts, she's attracted to men, she realises she likes women, and on a casual basis begins to refer to herself as a lesbian. But her attraction to men is stagnant, it's never changed, she's just realised she likes women also. I'm talking about Kat from The Bold Type. The Bold Type is a show on Freeform, which I believe used to be ABC Family, following the lives of three friends at their journalism-esque job at a pseudo-Vogue-like magazine. Now, Kat, why are all the bi ladies suddenly called Kat on TV, is a main character. One of three, the only woman of colour in their friend group, and is very bisexual. At the beginning of the show, like I said, she has a history of an attraction to men, then she meets a woman, a lesbian, and they fall in love. When Kat's relationship with Adina ends, Kat ends up sleeping with a man and is kind of sent into a bisexual crisis, based less on her feelings and more to do with how those around her see her.
I'm fine with bisexuals, Kat. I just wasn't expecting you to be one of them.
Okay, well, I am. And I shouldn't be made to feel less than because of it.
When Kat opens up to Adina about her bisexuality, she is met with hostility, with biphobia, and with Adina questioning whether or not any of Kat's feelings for her were ever really real. Adina even tells Kat to stay out of so-called lesbian spaces because her relationship with a man could make lesbians uncomfortable. It's really quite rough, but Adina is very much shown to be in the wrong here, and that this is biphobia no matter how it's cut. Adina eventually apologises and realises that her issues around bisexuality are due to her own issues around her own queer coming out, and not because Kat being bisexual is a threat to queer people or their past relationship.
I want you to know that I am okay with it. And I'm really sorry. I love you for who you are, and whoever you choose to love, man or woman, is very lucky.
Whilst this is all happening though, Kat discusses these issues and her internalised biphobia, brought on by Adina's very externalised biphobia, with a friend, a gay black man. They have one of the most nuanced conversations I've ever seen or heard in regards to bisexuality on television, discussing how biphobia presents itself in queer spaces, discussing the issues around stepping stone bisexuality, reaffirming that being bisexual does in fact mean that you are as queer as any other, and discussing how Kat, a biracial character, never feels white enough or black enough, straight enough or gay enough.
I just started seeing a guy, like a dude guy. And I haven't done that in a while, haven't done it since I met Adina. And honestly, it's been really fun, but I think I should end it.
Do you want to end it?
Not really. Nope. But if I like men and women, then why not just pick a lane, you know? Choose the one that needs more representation.
You want to date women so the optics look good for Instagram?
I just want it to be less complicated, that's all. But when she found out that I was hooking up with a guy, she said that I shouldn't come. That the lesbian community would have a hard time with it.
Wow. So bisexual erasure is still a thing?
That's what I said. I am never quite right. I'm not black, not white, not gay, and not straight. Where's the space in between?
Kat also goes on to have one of the most just overwhelmingly lovely coming out or re-coming out scenes I've ever seen, when she goes from unlabeled and queer to taking up space as a bisexual. The things that Kat says here in this storyline, in this quote about owning space.
Where's the space in between?
You have to create it. And you claim it as your own.
Well, it's like you said, you're a lover of people.
Yeah. But I also think that maybe it's more than that. Maybe I might be bisexual? And you guys know I hate labels, but this one feels important right now, to own the space I'm in and to make sense of it.
This is quite literally why I think it's important to have more self-identified bisexual characters on screen right now. In the scene where she's talking about biphobia, Kat clearly states that without the words to define her experiences, she's left feeling a little stateless in regards to her orientation, with her friend trying to remind her that she has to forge her own space. Kat replies, "Well, there is no space for people like me." To which her friend replies, "All queer space is your space." Again, bisexuals, please take up all the space you like in queer places. You are queer enough. And Kat too comes to a conclusion that is very personal to me and one I think is important. Kat identifies as bisexual. Using the word and enforcing her identity on the people she knows, partly in response to the biphobia she has received from the people around her. The attempt to question her validity in her own orientation does serious damage to her psyche, but she still knows that she is bisexual, and fighting against the biphobia gives her a sense of identity she didn't have before. She realises that identifying as bisexual is good for her, actually. That identifying as bisexual for her is about filling up space that she deserves to be in, that people have actively told her she doesn't deserve access to. Because the space in the middle is bisexual, and bisexual is queer space. Bisexual is LGBT, it's gay, it's lesbian, it's whatever the fuck we want it to be. Sometimes identifying as bisexual is one of the most powerful things you can do as someone who is bisexual, but is constantly being told that you aren't, or that bisexual just isn't a thing. To be the opposite of indifferent. To be loving of yourself and the identity label that describes your orientation. To be bisexual and visible. People who are attracted to more than one gender make up over half of the LGBT population, and yet these people are less likely to come out than their monosexual counterparts, less likely to have their own identity-based organisations, receive the least money from charities, have the highest rates of mental health issues, which have often been directly tied to being a consequence of biphobia. Bisexual identity, bisexual as a label, is the only LGBT label right now that is being negated by a label that means the same thing. And this is not a comment on pan versus bi and what is valid, but this is very much an acknowledgement that nobody felt the need to make up a non-transphobic adjacent label for lesbians or gay men. There definitely has to be a conversation within the bisexual plus community about why we feel uncomfortable with the bisexual label, why monosexuals feel uncomfortable with it, and how deep of an effect biphobia, bisexual invisibility, and bisexual erasure has had on us as bisexuals, as multi-gender loving people of whatever label you choose. There is so little bisexual plus pride in any queer spaces under any name, especially in places online. And let's be real, the fact that we see ourselves reflected so poorly in media is not a coincidence. It's part of the damn cause. I'll never be upset that a bisexual person doesn't want to use the word. Not really. I just simply wish that we could have more of an open discussion about why and how many people actually choose not to identify out of internalised biphobia. Or in fact, externalised biphobia, and have journeys similar to that of Piper or Kat. Like Kat says, without the words to express our experiences, then where is the space in the middle? Are we to remain homeless in the realm of identity? Do we create new identities? Do we stand up stronger in our tainted identity and reclaim stolen space? I don't have the answer to these questions, and I'm not God. But I do know that people cannot be what they cannot see. At least they cannot be what they cannot see through a lens of kindness and honesty and truth. I know that bisexuals need help because we aren't exactly the people getting the jobs that make these changes possible. People will never want to be seen relating to that which is monstrous. People cannot relate to that which doesn't exist. And having more bisexual characters on television, lead characters who actively participate in their label identity, can only help multi-gender attracted people. Those that are younger or those that have trouble with the label because of biphobia. Even those of us who will never identify with the label but simply want to know why the rest of us do. Identity, whether that be a person's name or culture or gender or politics or orientation, identity forces the rest of the world to see us, to acknowledge us, and to say that we are alive. I know that identity is a never-ending philosophical nightmare, and that identity politics feels like a buzzword these days, but identity still ultimately humanizes us in the eyes of others. Because whichever way the world cuts it, however great the story a writer chooses to tell is, or might be, if they have a bisexual plus character who does not acknowledge that they are bi plus, then all you do is risk closeting that character and denying them their own truth. The same way that truth can be denied to bisexuals in the real world, in their real world experiences, when they are told that bisexuality is a phase, or everyone is a little bisexual, or no one is actually bisexual, and like, bisexuality isn't even a real thing, right? As Adrienne Rich of All Damn People said, lying is done with words, and also with silence. And she said this too. There is nothing simple or easy about this idea. There is no the truth, a truth. Truth cannot be one thing or even a system. It is an increasing complexity. The pattern of the carpet is a surface. When we look closely, or when we become weavers, we learn of the tiny multiple threads unseen in the overall pattern, the knots on the underside of the carpet. This is why the effort to speak honestly is so important. Lies are usually attempts to make everything simpler for the liar than it really is, or ought to ever be. In lying to others, we end up lying to ourselves. We deny the importance of an event or a person and thus deprive ourselves of part of our lives. Or we use one piece of the past or present to screen out another. Thus then we lose faith, even within our own lives.